I'd like to thank you all for coming to the World War II Book Club of New Jersey. And it seems to be a tradition to say and ask, are there any new members or new faces here tonight? Or is everybody, quote, a veteran? All veterans, very nice. So just two housekeeping items. First one is we have a holiday party on December 7th, a significant date, and hopefully a significant night, because we plan to have a pretty good party. And we have a lecture scheduled where Miller Bugliari and myself will be presenting Berlin Then and Now, which will go over some of the buildings and things that were present in Berlin through the ages, particularly pre-World War II, and then what it looks like today, as well as leading into the bunker, the complex, the Führer bunker, the Reichschancellery, because in May we have a speaker who was part of the investigation on the skull fragment of Hitler, which has been getting some current notoriety. So he will be talking in May. The second thing is, if you haven't paid your dues, please do so. So we have 5 different speakers tonight. We have myself first, then speaking second will be...
We have Alfred DeLuca talking about his brother Russell DeLuca.
We have Travis and Justin Conley speaking, then Dr. Riva, Richard Riva, and we'll finish with Maxine Giannini. So I'll kick it off. And unfortunately, the technology always glitches. Oh, there we go. So I'll just do that. Basically, I'm going to streamline this. We have about 10 minutes per discussion. And my father was a rear echelon person who found his way into the front lines through the misfortune of being in Salerno and Anzio. But basically, he was, if you've all seen Saving Private Ryan, he was kind of the Oppum. He had his typewriter. He was in the administration in HQ most of the time. The picture on the far upper right is in North Africa. In the middle on the bottom is Naples, and the tent is, I believe, Anzio. Next slide. Actually, that's true. A lot of his stationery, or I should say all his correspondence, was saved by his Aunt Alice, and his Uncle Ralph. And what my father did, and this is the essence of what I'm going to show, he devised a simple code to get past the censors, because he learned right early on they wouldn't be allowed to disclose where they were militarily, as well as any details of what they had been through. So he devised a simple code to tell my relatives where he was. And the code was, next slide, which I'll go into, but the code was devised shortly after his basic training, where he did, and that slide before that showed he was at, I think, in Massachusetts, Camp Miles. And here he's doing machine gun training, which was more for effect than anything else. But his code used the name of my dearest, or dear Aunt Alice, dearest Aunt Alice rather, dearest, that's the key word, dearest. And then he would take and make up names that you would take the first letter of the name and he would spell out where he was. So I'll show you some of these letters. So go ahead and advance. Okay, so here is where he says, and these are the originals. Some are on Vmail, some are on print, some are typed. Because he was in HQ, he could do that. He says, anyhow, remember the capital letters when I address you, my dear Uncle Ralph and Aunt Alice. Actually, he usually wrote my dear Aunt Alice and Uncle Ralph. Not a big deal. Next slide, please. So he gets sent over. They're in North Africa now. So it starts with dearest Aunt Alice. And if you take the letters of people, and the key is none of these are people that anybody knew. He invented these names. So they knew that they weren't significant. So you have the O, the R, the A, and the N, which is Oran in North Africa. And sometimes he refers to himself as a joke, as his nickname was Danny, and he would refer to himself So if you saw something like, oh, have you heard from Danny, or do you know where Danny is, he's talking about himself. But of course, the censor didn't know that, because he knew the letter was coming from Stanley. Next slide, please. I'm looking at the clock. Okay, so again, he's been shifted to a different location, and when you look at the letters, Nemours, it's Nemours in North Africa. Next slide, please. This is, there's two stories that I'd like to throw in, apart from the fact that he had this code that he developed. And this is one of my favorites, where when he was in Churchill, Canada, it was very dark in his tent. He said pitch black. And a sergeant came to inspect the rifles. And instead of going in the tent where there was no light, I don't know if there was no electricity, but he said, pass me out a rifle. So they pass out a rifle. And as fate would have it, it was clean, got a good gig. They said, good rifle, pass out another. Well, they said, that's a good one. They passed them the same rifle. And they did this 5 times, and to make a long story short, got 4 different reports. You know, 3 different reports. 3 of them were clean, 2 had dirt on the barrel, and 1 had dirt on the stock. And that's when my father realized what the Army was all about. Next slide, please. And you can see the variety of mail, too. Some is in this truncated V-mail, some is actually letters, all kinds. So here now, the date, September, they're in Italy. So he didn't know exactly where, because they didn't actually tell him where in Italy he was going. He just found out he's in Italy. A little later, he found out where he actually was. Next letter, please. And that was in Salerno. Salerno. So now he's in Salerno. And the whole letter is basically garbage, just to tell him where he is. But a lot of the letters, and most of them aren't that interesting, because he's just doing what soldiers do, complain about everything from the bad food to the boredom to what the things soldiers complain about. Next slide, please. And this is a little bit interesting, but I won't go into it because of time. Since he was at Anzio and Salerno, and at this point, again, he's paying attention to the censors because they would block it out. He talks about the attack and what he went through. In one of the stories, he actually mentions the diving into a foxhole, but it was a chicken coop, and he came out full of feathers looking like something from another planet. That was his little bit of humor in a bad situation. Next slide, please. He liked to draw. He wasn't an artist on any notable caliber, like Maxine's husband, but he did some drawings, and he had a sense of humor about him sometimes too. Next slide, please. And another slide, please. And he quotes in one of his letters, he's talking about this particular cartoon by Bill Baldwin. And Bill Baldwin, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, if not all of you, was a great World War II cartoonist who really captured the essence of what the fighting man was going through. And it says, "This can't be no combat man, he's looking for a fight." The irony is, so thick you could cut it. The true soldiers, of which my father didn't consider himself one, but the people who actually were in combat had a whole different demeanor about them. Next slide, please. This might be, this is another description of going through battle, and he gets very philosophical, but we'll move on. Next slide. And at the end of the war, or near the end of the war, sometime in 44, he transferred from the Port Battalion, the Army, into the Air Corps. And he was with the 32nd Bomb Squad. And he had some interesting experiences, but again, he was in combat. He got to fly a few times as an adjunct, but he wasn't doing anything in terms of real combat at that point. Next slide, please. And I'll just show you two more drawings. And next slide. And then that's sort of sad sack, isn't it? Next slide. And let's see, this is another letter that we'll just go over. We'll skip this one. And this was his last letter, I believe, where he, no, hold on. Yeah, where he's realizing he's going to be shipped home. So that's the last letter. Next slide. And I'll show you some of, he had some pictures, and I had the privilege of going with John on this Italian and Sicilian war trip to sort of follow Operation Avalanche. John and I and a couple other people went through Sicily and Italy, and I had some of his old photos that I took with me, as well as, you know, from books I could find out where some of these pictures were. Some of them I couldn't find the exact position in today's world, sort of then and now. But, you know, I tried to figure out what some of these were. He had written Anzio on the back, but then I found them in the books. And these two little spikes are these two little spikes. I know you can't tell, but when you blow it up, you can. Next slide, please. The train station at Nettuno, not much different. Next slide, please. This is Castel Nuovo in Naples. It's much more built up today. Next slide. New facade. Now we're getting some Anzio pictures, the rubble. This is his picture that's in a book. Next slide. I didn't have too many of today's. This is a view of X-Ray Beach where the Allies landed at Anzio. Next slide. This was one of the friends he made in the military, Sid, who was standing right in front of the statue in Naples. And I got this off Google Maps. Google Maps is amazing if any of you use that. You can get down to street level and actually explore. I find it amazing. Next slide. And here's some of his pictures, some of the, you know, post-battle scenes. Next slide. And Anzio Annie, or Leopold, big gun that was used in the battle. And here we can, some of the things that are in his letters. Go ahead, next slide. And these are some of the terms he uses, as well as all the soldiers for the Germans. So, slide please. And in one of the books I was reading, Quentin Reynolds mentions foxhole was used in the Pacific Theater, but I find that not to be true because my father used it as well as I've read other people. So sometimes things are wrong. Next slide. Some of the jargon that I picked up in the letters, and this is going to be ongoing because I have more. And one of my favorites was, you know, soldiers go when they get relieved from wherever to for R&R, but really it's I&I, intoxication and intercourse, which in a lot of his letters, which I'm sparing you from, he talks about. I don't know if it's to impress my aunt, but it's definitely his hormones are up at that age. Next slide. Those are some of the medals that he won. Next slide. And I'll end with, he got a commendation in Anzio. It's really not much of a commendation. It's just, he had a photo that I'm going to end with that we presented to the museum in Anzio, and they liked it. And that is, go ahead, next slide. And I'll leave you with this one, which is one of my favorite photos because it shows the desolation and the destruction of war, and it's got this incredibly, you know, somber and depressing feeling almost. You can sense this truck is just trying to scoot around because danger lurks somewhere. So I will conclude with that, and now I'd like to introduce who's number two. Mr. DeLuca. John was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey, the third of four boys. He was educated in the Ironbound section. During World War II, he was employed at 15 years old, part-time as a packing clerk in Jewelry MFG Company. He earned a bachelor's degree with a major in management at Rutgers University and eventually became vice president of that company. His brother Russell and he were very close and shared all that we're involved in. The story is about Russell's survival in the U.S. Army during World War II on D-Day and the landing in Normandy in France in 1944. I'll give you the mic.
Okay, sir.
Do you need a pointer?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the New Jersey World War II Club. My name is, as he mentioned, Alfred DeLuca. John McLaughlin was nice to invite me to speak, and I thank him again. And we ought to remember, everybody should remember Paul Zito, the author of that magazine he put out, did a tremendous research. He did a tremendous research, and he brought back a lot of memories, good ones, sad ones, and some happy ones that came afterwards. But he did a fantastic job. When this all took place, it was a different world then. Today, 76 years ago, we didn't have all the things that we have today. They exist, we took them for granted. Today's world doesn't exist like that at all any longer. But anyhow, there was a big shall we say, our government did a good job with the media in terms of keeping the spirit of all the boys who had been drafted from their regular livelihoods. Of course, they were full of enthusiasm. And the one Major General Gerhardt, he greeted them saying, "Welcome to the 29th Blue and Gray Division. What a privilege it was to have you join us. And we have a certain tradition here, and that is," and he quoted him, "we are to shoot, march, and obey. And you don't deviate from that. That's our pride of our division." Now, Russell DeLuca was a private in the 116th Regiment, 29th Division, Company K. He was a mortarman. And he was an infantryman who was involved in first-hand combat. These boys all were coming from a replacement pool. You know what that means, a replacement pool? All those who preceded you didn't exist any longer. They were sacrificed. Russell got wounded in August, not June, in August. He only lasted less than a week outside of St. Lo. And all of his replacement, the third-time replacement, they were all eliminated also. And all he remembers was being picked out of behind enemy lines of a heap. Someone said, "This one is still alive." And that was part of his beginning. And then there's another lifetime. He got wounded outside of Lille, France. That was one of the entrances and exits for the soldiers to get through. They were supposed to get through to St. Lo in 7 days. It took 7 weeks, and many GIs were sacrificed. And you know, and many times in our conversations together, she wondered how is it that I'm alive? Excuse me if I sound so emotional, because this whole thing brought back a lot of serious memories. So anyhow, he was wounded on August the 6th. At that time, there was no formal lines, and the Americans were on a beachhead. They had no place to hide, no hole to dig. They were just targets. So all these boys were being sacrificed. As I say, he got landed. The Germans were in a push the Americans almost out. He got wounded behind the enemy lines, and 24 hours later, the Americans did push back, and he was picked up safe, thankfully. Let's see now.
Excuse me for 1 second. I'm just going to make it switch.
Loud enough? Oh, not catching.
Use this one.
Okay, that's it. That always helps different. We won't repeat it now. We'll just start from
Just start from the beginning.
from the beginning, right? Okay. See, that someone told you that. All right then. Anyhow, he landed at Utah Beach. Utah Beach was selected.
Can everybody hear him?
Yeah. Utah Beach was selected because of the slaughter that was going on in Omaha. They couldn't go there at all. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. The weather, the confusion, the commanders of all levels were being annihilated. They didn't survive either. So he wondered, how come I was the lucky one? Anyhow, this long walk they talked about between Utah and Omaha, it was a walk of hell. I won't go into details that he had explained to me during this time, but he was involved during that walk, a lot of combat. hand to hand. At one time, he says he had this one German, they were fighting hand to hand, and he was about to slit his throat, the German's throat. And then with all the hoopla about being well-trained, the best soldier in the world, he stopped. He said, what am I doing? He's a draft teacher, just like I am. So he said, he took him back around to them inside. He said, maybe I'll get a break. Well, he did a day later. He got hit and wasn't killed. So, but the book, last week when we were discussing, he mentioned about the 88 cannons, the horror that my brother described of those cannons. They weren't shooting at boats, they were shooting at right on land, these poor boys that were blown to bits. You know, and that's one piece here and there constantly. And he said at one point, what a feeling it is, you're aggressing, you're moving, and one of your buddies, even though they didn't know each other, but they were your buddies. And one by one, they're all going down, down, down. It's very sad, but out of it came some good. When he, on August the 2nd, he and this one lieutenant, what was his name? General Biggs, Lieutenant General Biggs was right next to my brother, and they all hit the ground together, ducking. Biggs never got up, the sergeant never got up. The rest was scattered like little stray rats. But anyway, we went on from there. He did survive, and I thank God for that. Okay. He revisited Normandy a couple of times. And of course, they really welcomed him. Big hero. The mayor of the town came, the children came, they marched, and it was a happy occasion. And it must have made an impression on him, because when he came out, due to the generosity of the GI Bill, he became an educator. In the city of Newark, he was principal of 500 schools. And he went around speaking to these children. Not in detail, but just to give them a knowledge of what happened. The French people called him up from Paris on March the 2014. And then he confirmed by checking with the embassy in Washington, D.C. They presented him with the Legion of Honor, the typical Chevalier. There were good memories and bad ones. We all should always remember them, because too many of them are gone. But he says, this is just a short, brief story of his experience. It was horrible to go into any more detail, other than to say that he was a very, very lucky survivor. Thank you very much.
But I'd also like to mention that most of the documents are right now being held by Dr. John McLaughlin, who with Dr. Steve Lamazzo is going to turn this into a book. They're co-authoring a book, and it should be very interesting, because what you're about to hear is very interesting. And I'll just quickly read, Travis sent in something, so I'll read it. He's currently a resident of New York City, where he works in construction and real estate, managing properties and construction operations for the Nussbaumer family. He's a member of the New York City Institute of Real Estate Management, the U.S. Green Building Council, and an active member of Trout Unlimited, an organization focused on preserving trout fisheries. He's a native of New Jersey, having grown up in Fairhaven, New Jersey, and attended Rutgers University. He pursued a master's in construction engineering management from the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And his true passion in life is fly fishing and spending time in his cabin on the banks of the Missouri River in Montana. But without much more ado, I'll present comments.
So I've been instructed to speak loudly, so if you can't hear me, yell at me, I'm used to it. So we would like to thank the World War II Book Club for giving us the opportunity We would like to thank the World War II Book Club for giving us the opportunity to speak here tonight and be able to share our grandfather's story. This is also our first ever book club, so please bear with us.
For many years, our grandfather's memoir relating to his life and experiences. For many years, our grandfather's memoir relating to his life and experiences as a survivor of the Bataan Death March and Japanese prison camps has remained relatively untold.
See, there's a little volume switch.
You have to do the handheld mic. It's the only one that's working. Turn that off.
Is this any better? Yeah. All right. So for many years, our grandfather's memoir relating to his life and experiences as a survivor of the Bataan Death March and Japanese prison camps has remained relatively untold. His memoir and collection of drawings and poems has been kept in a box for safekeeping at our family's house. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share this with you tonight. We also want to extend a personal thank you to Mr. McLaughlin and Stephen Lemazau for helping our family record in history the story of our grandfather's World War II experience.
So years after World War II, our grandfather, Harry Whittinghill, took the time to recall the painful memories and document his POW camp experience in a personal memoir. He was also able to compile a binder of original poems and drawings, which he smuggled out of POW camp. We will share with you a brief overview of his experiences as a prisoner, but his personal memoir tells a much more detailed story.
Our grandfather's Army life started at Fort Benjamin, Indianapolis, where he enlisted in the U.S. Army before leaving for basic training in California. He made a quick visit to his grandfather's home, who was also a survivor of Andersonville prison camp during the Civil War. His grandfather gave him words of advice that would eventually serve true, as referenced in his memoirs on page 1. Remember this, my boy. If war does come and you are ever taken prisoner, the friends you can trust with your life, you can count on one hand. Minus the fingers you can hold down with your thumb, and the little one left is mighty bent. These words my grandfather would remember in the Japanese prison camp.
After the visit with his grandfather, he was sent to Marshfield, California for basic training. He was assigned to the 34th Pursuit, and in November of 1941, his squadron had been transferred from Angel Island to the Philippines in the South Pacific. On December 10th, 1941, my grandfather caught his first glimpse of war, when his camp had been bombed and strafed by bullets from Japanese aircraft. For the next 4 months, my grandfather fought the Japanese at various locations in the Philippines with limited supplies and makeshift equipment. The most recognized fight being the Battle of the Points, where the U.S. retook the points at Guam Bay and held off the Japs from daily gunboat raids and barge landings. In our grandfather's words, the Battle of Guam Bay could never be explained because it was too deep in hell to ever be brought to life. In April of 1942, the U.S. surrendered, and our grandfather spent a few nights in the woods before surrendering to the Japanese. As a Japanese prisoner of war, our grandfather would experience unimaginable acts of physical and mental abuse and inhumanity over a span of 42 months.
After surrendering, our grandfather endured the Bataan Death March, where he spent 14 days and 60 miles marching under intense heat, sometimes without food or water. As he states in his journal, the 2 days without anything to eat were almost too much for some, and when we started the march again, those that were just too weak began to lag back or fell out of ranks. And when they did, it was simply their end. They were bayoneted, usually through the heart, and either pushed or rolled to the side of the road. It was a miracle our grandfather made it through the march, as he had close encounters with death along the way, as he illustrates throughout his journey.
When he reached Camp O'Donnell, He was put on various work tails, having to labor in deadly conditions, which put his life at risk each day. The work was grueling and dangerous, and prisoners were dying like flies, but they were simply pushed to the side for the next one to take his place. And in my grandfather's words, this work was damn hard. And with 6 of us to alternate the work, it soon took its toll. The first day, one man was knocked off the platform we were working on with the butt of a Jap gun because he could not keep up. He fell approximately 30 feet into a bed of large rocks. This man who fell from the butt of a rifle ended up dying on the rocks. And this illustrates the lack of respect for human life the Japanese had for the prisoners.
Escape went through the mind of my grandfather and many men in the camp, but the consequences of a failed attempt were unimaginable. As he details what happened when the Filipinos tried to free them at one point to those who tried to escape on page 13. At about noon, there were several Filipino heads, an American head of the failed escapee placed atop poles and wired to the fence in front of the building.
Another section of the journal which drives the brutality of the Japanese home and yet the American patriotism of the prisoners was the following on page 14. The firing squad then marched between us. There were 2 brothers, one in the group to be shot and the other still standing in the ranks. The one being shot said to his brother, "Tell the folks I went out like a man." He then came to attention and saluted. Several of the others being shot followed suit and also saluted. One man sang out, "God bless America." By this time, the firing squad was shooting.
The violence that our grandfather experienced in the Philippine Islands is gut-wrenching and unbelievable, but the hardships did not end in the Philippines. As he would then be moved to the hell ship Noto Maru to Japan. The trip to Japan on the Noto Maru is described as the worst experience of my grandfather's imprisonment. 1,000 men were pushed and shoved into the hull of the ship until there was no more room. Men had to either stay standing or lie in their own filth amongst those who had passed in the boiling temperatures under a closed lid. For 15 days they endured this trip on the Noto Maru, and many did not survive. When he reached Japan, he was moved to the Hanawa prison camp in northern Japan, which was a slave labor camp for the Mitsubishi Company. He was released from the prison camp in September of 1945 after 42 months of imprisonment. He was then given $300, limited medical attention, and then sent back home to Indiana.
His battles and struggle continued after World War II, as he would spend the years after the war battling respiratory illness and severe pains in his lower extremities. His suffering later in life was a direct result from the severe mistreatment and abuse of the prisoners that the prisoners endured from the Japanese in World War II. He would never have his medical problems properly diagnosed or treated by the VA hospital, which led him to seek private medical attention until his passing. So I wanted to keep this short tonight for 2 reasons. I still have so much to learn about my grandfather's story and World War II history, and finally because my grandfather's words tell the story far better than I ever could. So thank you for your guys' time tonight. And also, sorry, we have we brought a binder of all the original poems and drawings, so if anybody wants to take a look, we'll leave them at the front desk tonight.
There's a question.
Yeah. Sure.
Just a comment. When the war started, the Second World War, I was 8. I had an aunt whose brother was in the Army, was a captain of the Philippines. We never heard what had happened to him.
Yeah.
When the war ended, as far as they could determine, he survived the death march. He was put in one of those ships, and the ships was sunk by an American submarine.
Yeah.
So that was the end of him. So that's what happens.
I know. I mean, a lot of it was luck and perseverance. I mean, if you read through his memoir, you know, there was times where he could have let himself pass, and you know, he had the strength to fight through it, and it's quite quite an amazing story, and I'm sure Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Lamazow will do a wonderful job telling it.
This is an incredibly compelling story, and the memorabilia that they've got here, how it cut out is unbelievable. I think it's one of the great stories is how this all survived. The drawings are made by an unknown person that we know his initials because they're on the drawings, and they show the brutality and all of its terror. So I would urge you to do this. Also, we have now, not ready for you to get yet, but they kindly digitalized this a memoir. So in a month or so, we'll probably have it in one easily emailable form. So if you contact either John or myself, we'll be happy to send the original digital reproduction of this incredible memoir. And this man could write. He was a very articulate writer, and his poetry is also very articulate, very wonderful. So if you want it prior to our book, and actually if you want it and have some ideas about what you might think about how we should enhance or graphically demonstrate this, we will do that. I also told the grandchildren that they want a permanent archive for this, and I will make sure that this archive winds up at the Franklin Roosevelt Library in a separate collection where it will be maintained in perpetuity, because it deserves to be so. It's really an incredible document. Thank you.
And Victor wanted to add a few words apropos of the topic.
Yes. Thank you, John. My name is Victor Fabry. I've had the pleasure of attending a number of these events, but I wanted to speak to you for 2 minutes. Back in March, I was invited to Irvine, California, to a firm by the name of Edwards Life Sciences. Edwards manufactures heart valves. I happen to be one of the recipients, so I was delighted to go. At this conference, I met a gentleman who was 92 years old, and I have to put my glasses on to read this. His name was Lester Tierney. Not only was he a heart valve patient, but a survivor of the Bataan Death March in the Philippines. It's very, very apropos of the two young lads. During World War II, he was a Japanese prisoner of war. He worked 12 hours a day in coal mines to supply the Japanese war industry. Of the 12,000 Americans, only 1,700 lived to return home, about 10%. In 2014, after 70 years of waiting, he led a delegation of U.S. Army veterans who traveled to Japan to receive Japan's apology for the inhumane treatment by the Japanese military. After the war, Tierney returned home to become a successful college professor, and in 1995 he began an organization which sends care packages to U.S. troops overseas. And I've collected 3 memorable quotes from his presentation. Okay? This is interspersed in about a 45-minute presentation. These are his quotes. Open heart survivors have a responsibility to help others. Until you've had life almost taken away, you don't appreciate life. And the last one was, things work out best for those who make the best out of how things work out. I think you could all relate to that. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay. It gives me great pleasure to now introduce Dr. Richard Riva. His father, H.L. Riva, MD, was the commanding officer of the 28th Portable Surgical Hospital in the CBI Theater during World War II. He has over 1,400 letters of his mother and father who wrote daily. Hers were the Diary of a War Bride, his the Chronicles of a Combat Surgeon. Dr. Richard Riva, will present their timeline in a historical perspective utilizing a PowerPoint presentation. He shall also bring artifacts, which he has at the front there, so please take a look at them. Censored letters, time period news articles, ration books, OPA coins, and much more. Dr. Riva is an Army veteran having served in the 14th ACR in West Germany along the east-west border in 1968 and 1970. He then went to dental school. He's an oral and maxillofacial surgeon and served in the USPHS, public service, from 1978 to 81, but he now is in private practice. Gives me great pleasure to present Dr. Riva. And give me a second, I have to load your...
Thank you. Richard knows me. I don't know why he had to have a cheat sheet.
But I don't have the bio memorized. All right.
Before they got it up, as Richard said, my mother and father wrote every day during World War II. There's over 1,400 letters. My sister has my mother's, I had my father's. And it's taken me 4.5 years to put things together, to transcribe them, to edit. And I have 19 journals at home, but the 2 that are up there are the 445 pages that I feel are historical enough to talk about. 4.5 years in 10 minutes, that's going to be a nice little challenge, so let's see what I can do. My father would always sign his letters, loving you forever. Hers were the Diary of a War Bride, his the Journal of a Combat Surgeon. Next, please. And I have 9 different Army post offices in which they wrote letters to one another. As Richard showed earlier, there was some V-mail. Next one, please. And I have all the original letters and the envelopes in all those journals. As it was, my father was China, Burma, India. This is my dad. People say that I look like him, and I say, I'm much better looking than my dad. This was the orders that started the 28th Portable Surgical Hospital. It was the precursor of the Korean MASH units. Next, please, Carl. So what happened was that they came from Pittsburgh to Fort Meade to Holabird to Walter Reed to Camp Patrick Henry to Hampton Roads, which was the port of embarkation. This was a 28th portable unit. There were 4 officers, surgeons. 3 were surgeons, 1 was an anesthetist, internal medicine, and then there were 32 other enlisted people. When they got to Camp Patrick Henry, they left there and they went to Hampton Roads, and they got on the USS Graham, which was a Liberty ship, 3,500 miles, 13 days across the Atlantic Ocean. Next, please. And this shows a Liberty ship. There was Liberty ships and the Victory ships. Next, please. And this was Hampton Roads, the port of embarkation. And what they did was that they had these ships, the Liberty ships out here, and they would ferry the individuals to it, and off they went. Next one. And what happened was, going across the Atlantic Ocean, they used a variable time clock. And what this was, it was a zigzag circuitous route, so they were protecting themselves from the German submarines, in the sense that a torpedo goes straight. They didn't know where they were going to go because they were angling. They came in through the Straits of Gibraltar. They went to Oran, and it was in Oran that they found out, because the Japanese had come through China, India, and Burma like a hot knife through butter. In fact, they were bombing Bombay when my father landed there. He was supposed to be part of the Anzio invasion. That was canceled. He was detached from the US Army and attached to the Chinese Army, the Y forces. Next, please. Good. So coming from Oran, they came all the way over to Port Said. They came through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, into the Indian Ocean. We're not going to talk about the troop ships. Next, please. So when they came across from Aden, the Indian Ocean, came to Bombay, to Calcutta, they were on the Indian train system. Interesting that those trains were powered by charcoal. And then they came to Calcutta. Next, please. And then the last place they were in India was Chuba. And then they came to Kunming. This is my father's Chinese passport. Interesting, the date on this, you can't read it, was July 9th, 1944. I was born July 10th, 1944. And in his portable, that's good. In his portable unit, they did have the Chinese interpreters, the houseboys, etc. And this is how they censored the letters. They would cut it out like this, or they would redact it, and just by crossing things out. Next, please. These are the surgeons. All right, surgeon, and this was the anesthesiologist here. This is my father's mother, and if I could read this. In her Italian way, she wrote, "I'll be careful of cocoa, the coffee, the tea, and when it comes to gas and tires, Uncle Sam can count on me. I'll save my paper, my scraps for bullets to those pesky Japs. While as for ration sugar cards, I only think them of use if Uncle Sam, some future day, just send me back my boy." And in my father's letter to my mother, "I hope you don't have to write the same to your son." Well, I was Vietnam era, but I got Germany. I was a border cav officer in 68 to 70. The other thing is, this is my dad. We always kid him about his pose and his mustache, which my mother hated. There was propaganda that was given by the Japanese, and there was the Armed Services edition, the news. They loved to read books and things like this, and the Yoke Folk was one of the periodicals or letters, newsletters that were produced. Next, please. Also had the radiograms. He was involved with the Salween campaign. Next. But during the same time, my mother and father wrote letters, other things were happening. Mr. McLaughlin knows about General Stilwell being relieved. All right. At the same time, President Roosevelt had his 4th term. Next. All right. These were, my father kept his own personal diary, and in the diary we also talk about a P-40 that went into a power dive and the pilot had to parachute out. This is a piece of the parachute that he came down with. That's in the memorabilia, which is over there. And this is a blood chit. If you don't know what a blood chit was, that was what the pilot wore. And what that says in many different languages: "Dear friend, I am an Allied fighter. I did not come here to do any harm to you, who are my friends. I only want to do harm to the Japanese and chase them away from this country as quickly as possible. If you will assist me, my government will sufficiently reward you when the Japanese are driven away." That is the blood chit over there. Different forms of letters that they received. Go, please, next. These are the rations. All right, everybody was doing their part. They built a victory garden. These are OPAs, Office of Price Administration. The red ones were used for meat, the blue ones were used for processed foods, and this was my mother's gas ration card that she had. Next. They were war bonds. You could even have 25 cents, and after you got $2 of them, you could go ahead and buy a $2 war bond. Next. Things were happening. In China, the forces were starting to win, coming from Cheifang all the way to Wantong. They were winning back China. Next. At the same time, there was a Battle of the Bulge. At the same time, you're talking about Tokyo. You're talking about Wantong they had. Then there was the longest military pipeline from Burma all the way to Kunming in China. Next. Then the articles that we have the newspapers, the Iwo Jima Falls, President Roosevelt died. My mother was not a fan of President Roosevelt, but she wrote that he was a nice man. And although I didn't agree with a lot of his things, it's too bad that he didn't live to see the winning of World War II. Next. My dad was there when the Lido Road, the Stilwell Road, or the Burma Road was opened. It was 1,079 miles. My dad was there when they opened it. He was in scruffy scrubs. Everybody else was in spit shine and starched uniforms. Next, please. Ernie Pyle died. My father mentions it in his letters. He was hit by a Japanese sniper on Okinawa. And then in the European campaign, the Yanks met the Reds. Next, please. VE Day, May 8, 1945. This was also, the books that they carried was the WASC. And what that was a hostel inn, H-O-S-T-E-L, where they would have the soldiers who would go and take some time off. Next, please. Am I okay on time right now? Good, because I got about 2 minutes and 14 seconds left. Interesting, July 28, 1945, my father writes what's going on. You had a B-25 that crashed into the Empire State Building. That was a West Point officer who had over 600 hours of flying time. It was foggy, and he was supposed to land at Newark Airport. Didn't make it. Next. All right. This is Truman on August 14th saying that there has been a peace. My father writes a letter to my mother. All the letters were numbered. He never missed a day in writing. And he's talking peace, peace, peace. It's interesting that they did leaflet the area to let the Japanese know that something was coming. Next. Interesting, the Indianapolis. The Indianapolis was a cruiser that took the components of the atomic bomb to Tinian Island. My father wrote in a letter, those poor kids on that Indianapolis never knew what hit them when the atomic bomb went off. Pop, what are you talking about? All right? Well, that's not what happened. It dropped the components off, was sailing towards the Philippines when a Japanese sub hit him. Greatest loss of life. I had a patient who was a New York City harbor pilot who said, Naval Intelligence got a report that a battleship was in the area. Naval Intelligence said, we ain't got a battleship in that area. They disregarded the report. Interesting, the first one was Little Boy, that was the uranium. Fat Man was the plutonium bomb. Why was it named after Fat Man? Because somebody didn't like President Roosevelt. At least that's what was said in the letters. Next, please. Same thing, Japanese paper. Next. VJ Day was September 2nd, 1942 or 45. This is a cartoon that was sent. And it's, please, Mommy, tell Daddy who I am. He hasn't seen me since I've been born. Very poignant on that. These are letters that I added, and I'm not going to take the time to read them, but these are included in my father's letters. If he mentioned something about her letter that he received, I included it in the letters. Next. These are the medals. These are a citation. He got a Bronze Star. We don't need to go into all these. This was the Pacific Theater, etc., Victory Medal. All right, towards the end, the battles were over. He went to Shanghai. These are the tickets, the airplane ticket for his unit to go from Shanghai to Kunming, next one, and then from Kunming into India. This is that one there. And then to Casablanca for a de-embarkation where he was sent back to the United States. That's my dad towards the end of the war. That's my mother. That's my mother. This handsome guy is this handsome guy standing before you, and that's my older sister. Next and last one. That's the last letter my father wrote, December 7th, 1945. He said, made a promise to my mother, I will write you every day. He wrote every day. The one letter that I would like to close with is what my father said on September 7th, 1945. He said, war, what a waste of mankind and natural resources. And in 70 years, what's changed? So that is a quick 10-minute presentation, 19 volumes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Maxine Giannini, who was born, do you want me to read that?
Excuse me?
Okay, she was born in 1929 as Yellen, raised in Wequahic section of Newark. She studied at the Newark School of Fine and Industrial Art and the Brooklyn Academy. At the same time, she studied piano privately. Having begun her training at 5, she later became a student at Clara Husserl's. Husserl.
Philosopher.
Okay, who herself had been taught by Theodore Leshevitsky.
Shatitsky.
Close enough. God, these names. As an adult, she continued her piano studies with Robert Goldson, Mitchell Andrews, Genia Robinor and Seymour Bernstein. She married Hugo in 1955. Hugo died in 1993 of pulmonary fibrosis. Maxine discovered his last works in his studio. The last work of his easel was H-Hour, the moment of landing. In addition, there are 13 monumental artworks using the theme and symbols of the war and the 29th Division. She discovered the 27th drawings Hugo made beginning on June 6, 1944 on Omaha Beach, Dog Green Sector. These works have been exhibited in Paris, on Omaha Beach, in England, as well as in the States. Maxine compiled the book using the original art as well as Hugo's correspondence to his family and his first girlfriend. In addition, the book drawing D-Day is a brief history of the 29th Division. I now present Maxine. The mic has got a mind of its own. You'll figure out where it stands.
Thank you for having me tonight. I'm honored to be here. And I have 10 minutes. So, okay, thank you. The drawings you see to my left are the giclées or reproductions of the original works that I found in Hugo's studio. There was a 10-year difference between us, and he kept me very well protected from his experiences in World War II. So in finding the 27 drawings, I became an accidental historian of the 29th Division. 29th Division is a division is about 14,000 men. It was led by General Gerhardt, and General Gerhardt was, one of the GIs told me, was a little man trying to be a big man. He was a martinet. He made his soldiers sleep outside, whether there was a tent or whatever the weather was. If it rained, they were not allowed to put covers on, and it was a difficult division to be in. Of the 14,000 men in that division, the 29th was replaced 140%. They landed on June 6, 44, and they were to take Sambo in 7 or 8 days. It took them 44 days to get there, and 8,000 men later, over half a battalion. I found Hugo's letters to his first girlfriend. And I thought, well, what did he say these for? And I read them. You know, I felt an intruder. You know, this is kind of an astonishing thing. But there was a 10-year difference, and when he was in the war, he was 25, and I was the little girl of 15, so he had a life before me. And I read the letters, and I said, this is a book. I want to read just a few things that he wrote in these letters to his girlfriend and to his family. Hugo was an MP by accident, and he was in a Higgins boat with 37 men in his platoon coming in on June 6 at 06:30. They landed on a Teller mine, which was impaled on an obstacle. There were thousands of obstacles in the Dog Green sector. They were impaled on top of this obstacle, and they had to jump into the water. They didn't know how to use their life preservers. They were never taught. Out of the 37 men in the platoon, in the first 10 minutes of the war, 6 got to the beach. Hugo was told he was needed on the hill. The hill was the Vierville Draw. He climbed that hill and jumped into a crater and found himself totally alone. He looked out to the beach and saw the invasion coming toward him. So these drawings that he made here, these are the only drawings in the world of D-Day, June 6th, in the morning. He drew straight through the war. It was disallowed. He wasn't allowed to make drawings, but he was a man who did pretty much what he wanted to do. So I'm going to read you just a little bit about D-Day, but I did want to tell you that the 29th Division was in combat for 244 days. D-Day was the first day of 244 days. When I was in Europe the first time with the 29th Division, I met a guy named Ben Mermelstein who said, you know, D-Day looked like a picnic next to taking the subs in Brest. He said the Battle of Brest made D-Day look like a picnic. It was horrendous. So the first letters, I have pages. June 14th, 44. This is to his first girlfriend. My own. There are a few things a diary could contain that I do not insert in my letter to you. These things will be with me in part of my memory I wish to destroy. I will not talk of them, since the idea of their existence, even now, is unreal with horror. So do not ask for a description that I labor to wipe from my mind. I've been in France already, deleted by the censor, and for more than 1 month previous to leaving England, I've received no word of you. I only hope that this delay in mail is due to the postal difficulties. I myself have been unable to correspond, and because of this, I feel a sudden drop, as though writing letters has become a thing of the past. There are hardships that must be endured. This you know. And I won't say any words that can fitly describe, nor do I wish to, these circumstances. Only now, more than at any time before, I spend time consuming every little memory of you. The men were romantic. He writes another letter to her where he describes how thrilled he is to hear from her. Together we left England on June 6th, and you were with me in the water, and on the beach, and through the days and nights that followed. There were others like me, only they are still forever. And their beloveds wait for words that will not come. Did they not wish some last word to be heard from their blanched lips? Who was there to see and feel their pain? Where was the help they so needed when their body and shocked brain, they lay there drenched, overcome, and dying? And would you know that I exposed felt the presence of a strange lure. It was there that the living and dying and all for that terrible hour knew the ugliness of death. Was there, and this note, it was not fear that prevailed, but a resigned waiting for the moment that would leave one crushed and limp. There would not be escape, but there was at least till today. Yes, you are here. Your name is the only prayer I ever knew. So believe, accept my spirit, and be conscious that it is much more than love between us. It is, and you know, one soul living in two bodies. So the letters go on, and I'm only going to read one more because of time, and then if you have any questions. He wrote poetry, and he drew. At the end of his life, he knew he was dying of pulmonary fibrosis, and with oxygen being pumped into his lungs, he continued in the last decade of his life World War II and his memories of World War II. But now, these were abstract paintings that he made. So just give me a second. I just wanted one more letter. Dear Renee, as I write, I find it difficult to realize that I am not censored. Words just won't come now. This is May 45, end of the war. I've been tongue-tied so long. Perhaps if you write me questions, I'll loosen up a bit, okay? I'm still in the 29th doing occupation work in Bremen. My work for some time revolved about division's traffic system. After all, I'm a copper. Ha, isn't that a gag? Training with the infantry in England was tougher than combat. Of course, they taught us commando tactics, but they never suggested a real enemy. He makes all the difference. I used to be a doggy with a BAR, Browning automatic rifle. I assure you I would have been dead by now. If, as I wrote you, once while in England I was expecting a change for the better, he was made into an MP instead of a BAR man. I didn't realize how much better until shortly after D-Day. I haven't killed anybody yet. I don't think so. Most of the real killing is done by artillery. I have been so terrified as to forget eating for days at a time. Once in Brest, France, a shell landed in back of me, 4 feet to be exact. I measured it the next day. It was a dud, or I wouldn't be writing about it. On D+4, I was in a field with Rangers. Jerry bombed and strafed us. A few of the boys were replaced by craters, approximately 10 feet from me. I didn't display any heroics until it was absolutely necessary, and it was on D-Day. I spotted a half a dozen mines, and by lying down parallel to them, I cautioned the infantry as they approached. The doggies used to be in back of me in those first days. I shouted at them, but one guy didn't hear, and I saw him sink a few yards from me. His legs were only pieces of wet flesh and clothes. The blast was only one of many. Renee, I'm safe now. You don't mind if I talk a bit? That's enough for a while. Yes, one war is enough, and sooner or later, one's number comes. For as far as I could see along the water's edge, there were bodies, hundreds dead. I don't believe it then. I still can't quite grasp it. How did I come through without a scratch? This is a terrible letter. There were a lot of funny incidents too. I'll tell you all someday. Good night, and love always. So that's a little introduction to one man in the 29th Division, the 116th Regiment, Ugo Giannini. His works still stand. I have a collection of the first abstract work he did. He was a student of Fernand Léger in Paris. He was an art professor, and the first work that he did in '83 was Agony at Rouville. It's a huge work, and it's a cross. He saw the war as a crucifixion. He thought that the men were being crucified on a daily basis. So if you have any questions? Well, thank you for
I'd like to point out, Maxine has a couple books that she brought that are for sale. They're at a reduced price. So if you're interested, you can ask Maxine. And I want to thank you all for coming. Hopefully you enjoyed this slightly different venue than our usual author and presentation that way, because enough people in the audience have had experiences that might be of interest. So if there are any questions or comments?
The Christmas party is what date, and the upcoming programs after that, please?
We have December 7th for the Christmas party. That's Monday at Mayfair Farms. And then are all of you familiar with the blog that Dr. McLaughlin has on this book club? Is that alien to? Anyway, it'll be posted on the blog. But we have venues in January, February, March, April, May, and May. So we have a host of different speakers, and that will be put up shortly.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for coming.